Anyway, what, ladies and gentlemen,
Welcome.
welcome back to Common Mansplaining. I'm Eddie, and that's Christian. I don't know
I'm
if
your DJ for
ooh,
this episode of
uh,
Common Mansplaining.
oh yeah, Christian's voice is a little bit raspy, so he may do the whole teenager like voice
Maybe,
shake.
hopefully I can do Brian Williams. Got my first real six string.
I love it. But anyway, we're going to talk today a little bit about Israel and the situation in the Middle East, Gaza Strip and West Bank and all that fun stuff. But before we do, please hit like, please hit subscribe, turn your notifications on. Promise if you stick with us, we will earn your viewership. And I'll tell you, we're coming up on 1,000 subscribers, and we're gonna do something special for when we hit that milestone. That'll be a huge milestone for the channel. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do, but we're going to talk about it over the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we actually ought to hit it by the end of January, if not before. So that's we're on pace to do very, very well. So thank you so much for everybody watching. So the Middle East, if I had a nickel for every time there was a skirmish, battle, war, conflict of any sort in the Middle East, I would rival Elon Musk. I would probably be the richest man on earth. It's only been going on for 3,000 years.
I feel like you could like manipulate your kids with this. Like, hey, you clean your room or you will inflame the Middle East. And when something blows up, look, this is your fault.
So you did this. This building would have still been here. But let me say this. Even when I was young, like I would read in the newspaper how like, okay, somebody would go into Israel and like it'd be a suicide bomber. He would take out like 2 people and damage and injure a third. And then like the next day, I'd read about Israel blowing up a building in response and wiping out like 700 people. And after a while, I started to wonder, like, why do they keep doing the first one if the second one is bound to follow? There must be some kind of weird break in the stimulus response understanding in that area of the world. I don't know. Like,
Right.
it's like
So,
if I
right.
every time I hit you in the face with a punch, you like just pulled out a gun and like.
All right. So the caveats here are huge, right?
Yeah,
My back is breaking under the
indeed.
size of these caveats, and the grains of salt that we must carry when factoring any media report
Yeah.
coming out of the Middle East. This is a big thing, right? You grew up in Durham, North Carolina. I grew up in Southern California. Like, you didn't go walk the streets of the West Bank or Gaza. Everything you got was filtered through media narratives,
Oh, absolutely.
right? And so, and one of the things, Yasser Arafat, who was the big Palestinian leader through most of my life,
Yep, mine
and
too.
well into my 30s, he would regularly say something very appeasing and appealing to the English press, then go and give a rally in Arabic telling all of death Israel, and nobody would translate what he was saying. Well,
Yep.
not nobody.
Right.
Very rarely would they would. And they'd be like, oh, this is what he really means. You can throw all that conciliatory stuff that he's been saying. He's feeding you what you want to hear. So
Man.
plus, and then anything about casualty numbers, absolutely unreliable. Like,
Yeah.
and this is a big thing that Middle Eastern countries, cultures don't have credibility when it comes to certain facts, when it comes to Israel and war, right? You remember the PR man for you probably don't. The first Persian Gulf War.
For the PR guy.
All right, there was this guy for Iraq who
Mhm.
would give press conferences on the status of the war. And he would be like, just saying the most unhinged stuff. The Americans are killing themselves. They are surrendering as fast as they can and just turning the guns on themselves. Well, right, the exact opposite is happening. His troops that aren't being completely annihilated with like very low casualties, like we're getting sprained ankles, like
Yeah, right.
trying to reload our weapons. Those are the injuries we're having. And there's a true story of this one disabled tank as they were going, in formation. The other tanks were just this one tank was disabled. They couldn't move, and they had a problem with their firing weapon. And this Iraqi group they saw on radar was coming towards them. They were just spaced out far enough that they couldn't get support from the other tanks in time. And this group came up, and what'd they do? They were surrendering to this helpless tank. I mean, they had like pistols in their hands.
Like, what are we
and they were like, finally, a broken down tank that's not killing us, please. And they accepted this surrender, this whole battalion of Iraqi troops, right? That was like, and so the media were embedded, right? They were on the tanks. They were in that war. And so they knew firsthand what was going on. And then they'd go and hear these straight up lies and propaganda that were being spit out by the Iraqi foreign minister or information. I think it was information, and I'll try to find some of the clips. It's really hilarious.
And that even persists today. Like even today, just the other day, I saw a report about how much the Gaza Strip has been expanding their numbers to make in an endeavor to make Israel look bad, like in order to villainize them and make them look like the most horrible people on earth. But there's something even more fundamental that's at play here, in the fact that to an extent, and again, giant grains of salt, numbers don't really matter so much if you are fighting to defend yourself from an aggressor, right? Like one of the biggest things that I see in the
numbers don't matter. That's a spicy take.
Well, no, yeah, it is a spicy take. Let me clarify that. Let me explain what I mean. So what happens is a lot of times I'll see people discuss.
You mean true numbers or actual numbers don't matter?
Well, both. In this sense. So what I see often in the conflict, against the Gaza Strip right now that's being engaged in, is routinely people will say, well, is the Israeli forces are not providing a proportioned response, right? So that's the common critique, is that Israelis are killing 10 times as many or 15 times as many people. And I'm like, they're not called to. The other group is the aggressor, right? When someone hits you first, you're not supposed to just hit him back and stop short and not complete the act to defend yourself. You're supposed to do whatever you're supposed to do to defend yourself, and then you're done, right? It's not like with October 7th and people come in and kill 1,000 people or take up to 1,000 people hostage. And you don't go back and hit 1,000 then deep and then say, all right, we're done. Stop. We've created a proportioned response. We're done. No.
Well, let me paint a scenario for you. So imagine Eddie and I are walking down the street in a neighborhood. Now I'm a large 6'4" man, a broad stature, over 250 pounds.
Big guy.
Eddie is slightly more diminutive, right? But Eddie can handle himself. I just really have brute strength. I don't have any technique. I really can't.
Size,
but if somebody came up and started something, they might think heuristically, hey, the easier target for me would be to attack this person who's 150 pounds or less.
Sure.
And 5 foot, in the 5 foot range.
5'5", yeah.
Rather than this behemoth over here. And they would get their butts kicked.
Yeah, but normally they'd be right? There is a reason that fighting sports are divided into weight classes.
Well, yeah, but they might not accurately. So now they've attacked you, and they have not properly anticipated your ability and what you're willing to do when desperate and your life is threatened.
Absolutely.
Right, and so you might lash out with a type of attack that you may not use in a tournament, or if me and you were sparring. Right. But when we're being attacked by somebody, right, it's sort of a desperate situation. Right. And so you might use force that maybe permanently cripples or is lethal to this person. That's not on you, right? That they weren't able to anticipate how much a desperate person was going to react to defend themselves.
And so much worse if they were able to properly identify how bad it would be and then did it anyway. That's what drives me perhaps the most nuts about this situation. It's not like anybody in the Palestinian world is under any illusions about the military capability of Israel. Like, none of them are thinking to themselves, if we hit them, there's no way that they can fight back. None of them think that. They all know for a certainty that if they attack, that there will be repercussions, and repercussions exponentially greater than those that they originally dealt.
Now let's talk about a couple of different things. So regularly Syria or Hezbollah will lob some missiles, some rockets over the border, or even Iran will do something provocative
All day long.
And this is when Israel would sit back and they do the proportional response you're talking about, where they'd be like, okay, we're gonna do. And so that's what we've kind of gotten used to. And even when Gaza would launch a few rockets, they do a sort of, all right, and they'd even throw out leaflets, hey, we're going to destroy this building, right? It's when we have intelligence that even if we don't kill anybody in Hezbollah proper, it will be a nuisance, or it'll be something that will set back their operation. So we're going to destroy this building in response to you. So that's what people were kind of used to.
Right.
What's different about this encounter is it's more than just an encounter. It was a war.
Yeah.
It was an invasion declared by the Palestinians, who essentially, they're in these camps. There are Arabs, Muslims, living peacefully throughout Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is that they accept that Israel is a legitimate state. That's
Right.
all you have to be, and then you can live peacefully anywhere in Israel. The people living in Gaza, the only difference is that they think Israel doesn't have a right to exist, and they want to violently. Their solution is to achieve their ends through violence. Now, it reminds me of the very famous Morgan Freeman scene in Dark Knight. Do you know that? When the guy tries to blackmail, he says he wants hush money for not exposing Bruce Wayne as being Batman.
Right,
Do you remember what Morgan Freeman says?
No.
He says, so what you're saying is one of the wealthiest men on the planet is secretly greenlighting, or what is his term for working at night, doing double duty as a vigilante, beating up thugs, terrorizing the city, and your plan is to blackmail this man? Right?
Yeah,
and
right.
He's like, good luck with that. Like, he doesn't even try to negotiate with this guy. And that's the whole thing. Like, when I think of the sensibility of, like, okay, Palestine, you don't like Israel, and you're willing to kill Israel, Israelis, certainly unarmed Israelis.
Mm-hmm.
So, you got a couple of bulldozers, and you pick a date that Israel isn't paying attention, and you do this invasion against a legitimate military force. Like, how could you think this was a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I'm at. Like, it almost, don't get me wrong, because right and wrong is a huge part of conflicts also, and we're going to get into maybe some of the moral equivalencies that are made here. But even without that, like, even if you stripped this of its moral terrain 100%, with just cause and consequence, it's a no-brainer to know that if Mexico does anything to us, even if we're wrong, it's not going to turn out well, right? Like, that's just a no-brainer. Like, even if Israel were, like, at fault or something,
like if Mexico legitimately with their army attacked us,
yeah, like, or like, let's say, like, we took over Mexico for no reason, right? Like, we're the villains, right? We're bad, but then Mexico, like, has lived under our occupation for years and years and years, and they're like, we've had enough, so we're going to just kill and rape a bunch of people. That's not going to go over well. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about anything else except for we're bigger, we're stronger.
Well, it's also because Palestine wants to achieve, it is willing and wants to achieve their aims through force, right? What is it that Palestine wants? It wants every Hebrew person, whether they practice their religion or not, to pick up and leave Israel wherever without any financial support or compensation from them,
Yep.
and then that they freely be given all that they've left over as loot and treasure forever, right? And that they're willing, and that they obviously lack the means to achieve this militarily, but
Obviously.
they still endeavored on a war. Now, Israel officially said, okay, Hamas, they had an election. Hamas is the legitimate government of Gaza.
Right.
And one of the ways they were able to pull off this was there was some agitation with Syria, Hezbollah, and the Houthis and stuff. And Hamas said that they weren't going to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, we're just going to focus on trying to govern, get people more reliable power in Gaza City, make sure that food is more widely available. And Israel was like, oh, okay, they want to act like a legitimate government and not just focus on terrorism.
Right.
And so they had sort of entered this thing where they were trying to give Hamas a little bit of leash.
Right.
To show, okay, if you wanna be a peaceful, legitimate government, we're gonna start giving you some credibility on that. They immediately turn around and attack. So Israel declares war. Now, the war it's not going well for Gaza.
It's not going well.
Right, because militarily they cannot compel Israel to do anything. They couldn't compel Israel to drink a Diet Coke if they're dying of thirst, right? They have no power in this as far as force. But you know what? So now they're complaining, they're begging for ceasefires.
Yeah.
How come nobody's talking about there's a very long-standing tradition in war when you want a war to end, that you don't have the means to fight, that the fighting is going so poorly for you. It starts with an S. It's just right on the tip of my tongue.
You sue for peace.
You surrender.
You surrender. Maybe even give hostages back. That would be crazy talk. Now, all right. Let me play.
I mean, why is that a spicy take? If Gaza wants this to end, all they have to do is surrender. Why?
Yeah, maybe. So here now.
They want this war to end.
Let me play devil's advocate for a while. All right, because there's obviously like I said, in any of these situations, there's huge lumps of salt. One of the issues is Hamas kind of came in, and the moment they took power, basically, and they have a charter that's absolutely ridiculous, which needs to be amended at the very minimum. But let's say that they were able to do that. And then they also need to continue holding elections. They haven't been, but let's say they're able to do that, right? Insofar as it goes, they are living in bad conditions. They're not happy where they are. They feel like they're essentially living in a prison. It's not exactly the same thing, but to be fair, there aren't really many words to describe the conditions of the Gaza Strip, except for this is what the Gaza Strip is like.
They are free to emigrate to other nations. And when it's not being bombed out, people can come and tour Gaza, and they say the fish restaurants are great.
Now, I'd challenge that. I would challenge that point. I would say that they're free to migrate within a little bit of flexibility, within a degree of flexibility. I would say that they're definitely restricted. I wouldn't say that they're like banned from migration, and I also wouldn't say that they're like the corridor is just wide open. It's definitely at least complicated for them to move out of their state. And part of the problem with this whole thing, right, is that all the other Palestinian nations in the area don't want to have anything to do with them, because the
other Arab nations.
Yeah, all the Arab nations, right. Ultimately, it's there's some probably terminology that can be refined.
Well, that's their own fault, right? They're welcome in Jordan. They're welcome in Lebanon. They're welcome in Syria, and that's why right now, this is my spicy take.
All right,
I agree with the Trump administration. They want to work towards a one-state solution.
Interesting.
And they have the support of the Saudis. The Saudi Arabians would rather have a responsible, rational government of the Israelis to deal with than the Palestinians 7 days out of the week.
And maybe that's better for us, maybe that's better for Israel, and maybe it's better for Saudi Arabia. It may even be better for a lot of the other Arab nations. But just briefly for a moment, if you would,
Mm-hmm.
put yourself in the shoes of a standard Palestinian citizen.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't vote Hamas in.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't even there when it happened. You're only 15 years old.
Okay.
Right? But now you're in a really bad spot. You're not happy with your life. You're not happy with your government. You're not happy with your position. But since you've been alive, Israel's killed your mother, your father, your uncles. You get where I'm going, right? Like,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
not feeling great about Israel either. You're not like, sure, I'll just like assimilate in, right? Like, you're not going to be in that spot, right? Psychologically, that's a very tough ask. So what do you do with the, I don't know, it's probably like 1 million out of the 2 million Palestinians probably aren't happy with their situation, but aren't happy with the alternatives either, right? Like, they're not going to, now, they probably would be happy with a two-state solution if it could be managed. That would be much more complex to do, much more complex to implement, much more complex to set up infrastructure, and then they probably would have to like dethrone Hamas and install another puppet regime. But
well, they've been offered a two-state solution, right?
Sure, but they've never been offered one with the true 100% concessions that the Peel Commission conceived of in 1947.
That's true, but they got really close with Bill Clinton,
right,
and Ehud Barak, and Yasser Arafat, and it was pretty clear those were always going to be the most generous terms.
Yeah,
and if they didn't take them, it was always going to be less territory.
Yeah,
right, and the reason why they didn't take them, because the one stick point wasn't really territory. It wasn't even like, oh, we want this additional land. It was they had to recognize Israel as a legitimate state. They won't do it. And that type of irrationality, when they want to use force to achieve that end, to drive the Israelis out, and they can't do it, right? So all they can be is a bad neighbor. You disperse them, they can be angry and hate the Israelis like the Irish hate the British, right? And go to pubs and rally against how much we hate Britain, and let our cricket games or soccer matches be proxies for wars.
right.
But you need to stop being like, the Saudis are done with it. Everybody is like, look, we can get along with Israel. Jordan is like, we can get along with Israel. I think Iran is the instigator that doesn't want anybody to get along with Israel, and created this conflict. This conflict was timed, not that it would succeed, but because relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia were getting what it reminds me of, a little history. And they
were just going to sign that thing, right? Like right before Iran wanted to interrupt.
So a little
that
mansplain
deal.
history. In the 1800s, during the reign of Queen Victoria, Russia, the Russian Tsar, this is pre-revolution, decided to attack the Ottoman Empire, and to get all the way down and control, essentially free Istanbul, and control, because they had basically had control over Bulgaria at the time. So it was just a little bit Russia.
Wait. Are you about to tell me that there was conflict in the Middle East even in the 18th century?
Russia's thesis in this was that no Christian country would muster their armies to defend a Muslim country, right? Because Russia was a Christian country and they were attacking a openly Muslim declared country. Their aims in doing this weren't actually religious, wasn't crusade. It was they wanted to have military bases on the Mediterranean Sea, right? Right now, they have them in Ukraine, right? Crimea, but they didn't have them on the Mediterranean Sea. Well, what happened, right? England said nope, right? And what all these Christian nations came to their defense and mustered and fought against and defeated the Russians we're defending a Muslim country against Russia. And I think we finally gotten to that point where, rather than like, hey, we've got to stay together, the Muslim countries now have strict. We had to stay together and support other Muslims, no matter how crazy, how unhinged, how violent they are, against any Hebrew or Christian nation. The Saudis, certainly like the Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, they just want to have peaceful relations, with everybody. And they would rather, right, unite with the Hebrew power against this Muslim power. So that's a big shift. And the Saudis and others realize that to do anything else is playing into Iran's goals. And Iran's right now are just being jerks.
Yeah.
And so, to mansplain it, but they're trying to deliberately be antagonistic and terroristic. Anyway, shorthand is jerks. And but now they're finally saying, okay, that Muslim connection means less than but the right thing, prosperity, and just the right thing to do. This is, Israel is the legitimate government.
Well, I'd hope that it's because it's the right thing to do. I'm not sold that that's the reason. I think the economic prosperity is probably more of an influence. One of the things that's going on here that I have to admit my own ignorance of is that, even within the scope of the Muslim religion, right, and within, there's always like this kind of like two axis of conflict here, right? Like not only is there the state line, but there's also the religious line. But then even inside that, there's like, the Sunnis and the Shiites and I'm not well educated on that, like on the history of each of those tribes and why, each one has certain beefs with others and why some beefs might be enough to like depart from, the larger Muslim whole to engage.
I'll give you a
mansplain
like
an Israeli
version of it. As soon as when Muhammad died, he had two sons, and essentially the Sunnis and the Shiites split off from that. The Sunnis control, or what the Saudis are, and control all of the sacred shrine locations, Medina, Mecca and stuff, and which as a Muslim you're supposed to one time in your life make a trip, make a pilgrimage to Mecca, kind of things like that. Right. And so wielded really outside influence, right, because of that, and kind of treated another, especially the Persians were not naturally Muslim. They weren't Arab, right? This was really Muhammad's idea, was to unite Arabs first, and then they sort of converted the Persians by the sword. Right? Conversions had been sort of lax. Christians, maybe there was also Zoroastrianism. There were some other stuff. So traditionally, Persian Muslims were very sort of like non-fanatical or very lax, like chill Muslims, and Shiite, mostly Shiite, in their whatever their alliances, and sort of treated like second-class Muslims because they weren't Arabs. Essentially, the Arabs are the top of the hill, and the Sunnis see themselves as the gatekeepers of what it means to be an Arab Muslim. Like, it's kind of like an Italian Catholic feels like they're a little bit more Catholic than than a Roman Catholic from enough. Say Thailand or something, right? And so right. Obviously, like, we're just like, that should be no big deal, but it's been a big deal, and and as mainline, and so in the 20th century, last bit of mansplaining history, when Britain came in and finally started occupying the Middle East after World War I, they started carving up countries that never really existed. The borders didn't really exist, right? The Kurds had loosely had borders and stuff like that. They never gave them a country, but it was kind of based on, all right, well, these are the Shias here in Iran, these are the Sunnis, right? Da 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 da. and then thinking that those would be, a sort of dividing. So that's the mansplaining history lesson. Okay.
All right. Okay. One thing that I've always noted about the situation in Israel is that in the modern world, right, we're kind of like very opposed to any sort of colonialism, any sort of like conquest in any form, right? And so we have this kind of natural predisposition to kind of like not like most of the European nations because of their conquests.
Why is
we have this natural well, that there's a lot of different reasons. I'm sure one of them is that that there's a racial element to it, right? There's a concept that in the postmodern thought, everyone should be kumbaya, singing happy and equal and holding hands, and anytime there's obviously, and even within the Christian world, anytime there's a disillusion of that goal, then there becomes some strife. But my observation is this: in this modern world where that's such a problem, Israel stands almost alone in being almost the only state in a long time that was formed not by conquest, but by edict, by like Britain and France just saying,
they followed the Ottoman Empire.
Right?
The Ottomans ruled,
one of the very
Britons came in. Ottomans are no longer, we're in charge now. Here's what we're doing.
Right. Right. But like if you think about the formation of the state itself, like almost no other place on earth can claim like freedom from conquest. No other state on earth can be like, we're here because someone gave this to us. They're all like, we're here because our ancestors conquered
maybe Micronesia,
right?
Some of
and sure,
like
there's
our ancestors
conquest
came here. Nobody was living here before.
Yeah, so maybe some small like. Sure. I'm sure there's like little small examples, but like in the modern world, and if you think about big examples, like this alone is, and almost immediately after being given a nation, everybody declared war on them, and it's like, from that point, I don't see how you could properly assume that Israel is the aggressor in any of the consequential
they've defended
conflicts.
Themselves. They've shown themselves to be legitimate. I mean,
don't get me wrong.
If Israel lost all their wars, and we had to come and say, all right, Israel, even though you lost this war, you're still the country, right? We never had to do that. Israel defended themselves and be like, dude, this is a legitimate win.
And it's just, if I feel like it behooves me to say that Palestine exists at the pleasure of the fact that Israel has chosen not to eliminate them, right? Like many, many cases, they've taken land and then said, you know what, we're going to give part of this back because, for one thing, it's difficult to defend. And for another thing, it was yours originally. We're not trying to, we're not trying to take over the world. We're just trying to defend our borders.
Jews in Gaza, and they left and just abandoned their homes and gave them over to the Gazans.
They would say they gave back the West Banks. I mean, like, except for some of the Golan Heights, like almost everything they've taken as part of their defense has been given back. And sometimes I just don't understand. Now that isn't to say that Israel's perfect.
No country
they're far from it.
Yeah.
But that I see them defending themselves over and over and over again. And then one of the biggest critiques that I hear of this whole situation is like, well, Gaza is being occupied. I'm like, they claim that they're in an open air prison. I'm like, well, that's where you put people that are criminals that have attacked you for no reason.
You are living in a state of war. If you don't want to live in a state of war,
right? Like
surrender.
There's plenty of people in America that are likewise in prison for attacking somebody without cause, right? Like that's just what we do to people. Now that isn't to say that that's where we want them to be. We don't want them to be in a prison. And again, I'll quibble with the terminology. I don't really think that it is a prison or an occupation. There are some key differences that make it obviously better. But that having been said, like that's the common critique. And I'm like, I just don't think it applies here because that's exactly what is supposed to happen to people who want to eradicate.
I think they should go to,
for no reason.
I think the Palestinians would do well in Algeria and Morocco, because those are similar sort of French influence, light French influence, mainly Arab, still by the coast. Everything's about the same. and then they could live a lot
they
more
would have to give
peacefully
up.
and live the same quality of life at least.
They would have to give up the Holy Land. I don't know, like I, not being from that area of the of the world, not being either Jewish or Muslim. I don't really know what that means. Sure, the Catholics took it for a very brief time, and like during the Crusade, the first Crusade, and second part of the second. But it's like
They just think they live there. That's their home.
I don't know what that means. So
Palestine, any Arab, they're Arab, Palestinian Arabs, can live anywhere in Arabia, in the Middle East. Right? Really?
Yeah, sure, I get that, but like let's say, all right, let's say I had a problem with my neighbor, right? We're squabbling, and then like eventually the town of Cary comes by and they're like, listen, you guys obviously can't live together, so we're gonna move you and we're gonna put you in the South, Southern California, in like San Fernando Valley. We're gonna give you a nice mansion to live in. I'd be like, yes. Like I wouldn't be like, no. Cary is the Holy Land. I can't leave.
I've traveled.
I get that this is their home, but there comes a time where at some point you got to be like, well, if we can find better living conditions somewhere. But I would say that, to be fair, I would say that to both sides. I don't really think it matters.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotional things we can deconstruct that. I want to go back to the roots of why colonialism is seen negatively, because you're seeing it. I think it's
Sure,
because it's rooted in postmodernism, one of my bugaboos. So, postmodernism, right at the whole, wants to say that every culture is equal. No culture is better than another. And I refute that. No, right? So the Romans felt like they were the most elevated culture at the time, as far as governing the world. And like they got up and they saw my ancestors running naked on the hills of Scotland. And they built Hadrian's Wall. They didn't feel like the Scots deserved to be conquered and brought the civilization of Roman civilization. Right? I'm kind of proud of that, actually.
Freaks.
But essentially, they felt like, conquering, but it was bringing Roman order was a gift. The British felt that in the very much so in the 18th and 19th century, that British culture had elevated to a point where they were bringing, the British Empire was a gift, right, to govern India and South, and other places, and this was going to. They were the first major country to end slavery, right? No other country did that, and this was an enlightenment. Excuse me. Anyway,
yeah, there's definitely like
right. So they felt
Britain
like
definitely ended.
The British were perfect, but at that time that their culture and their governance was better than what they were finding in these uncolonized lands, shall we say, especially in South Africa, or especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And so they were going to bring British order, and that was going to elevate, and really so much of British culture still infuses these cultures now, when India is now an independent country, but really the British laws, Australia. Anyway,
Australia too.
Postmodernism rejects that we can say, like, look, no culture is perfect, but Western culture is better than all the alternatives, and Christianity is the best of all the alternatives. Right? Would be an unbelievably spicy and controversial take in postmodernism. Right? They want to say everybody's the same, so we shouldn't colonize. We shouldn't bring our Western culture sophistication that somebody living in a in a sub-Saharan culture is every bit as the quality is every bit as equal in culture as people living in Oxford, England.
Let me quibble with the terminology here. I don't like the word better. Not in the sense that, like, okay, like if I were to match any two cultures together, right? Like there's so many different individual categories that we could
Say
judge them on,
Japanese
so
and
right?
Italian.
Sure, Japanese and Italian, right? So, but there are within those categories, the problem with assigning just like this one is better is a matter of weights, right? So, like I could, for example, say that Italians, while they
Could
had
you
the
say they're
Roman
more
Empire,
advanced?
I
Could you
think
say a
even
culture is more advanced than another culture?
sure, like within an individual category, I think you could probably at least be concise enough to say better. Like, for example, you could say something like, while the Roman Empire was around, it was among the most advanced cultures as far as technology is concerned, as far as, like sea trade is concerned, as far as fishing,
Governments.
like
They're
various of
effectively
their
saying
trades and
governments.
yeah, right. Like their even their
The
philosophies
public
were very,
health. The,
there are some public
the
health, right? They
aqueducts.
had they had baths, they had aqueducts, they had runoff systems. Now, that having been said, though, like if I were to compare them, say to like a Native American tribe, let's say like the Apache or something, right? I would guess that the Apache are probably more in touch with their spiritual self, like as far as their connection to nature and stuff. There's always going to be a category where each culture is probably going to have like is their greatest strength. And to say that one is definitively better than another is very complicated, because then you would have to say, well, based on the fact that I weight these thusly. And so you'd have to state that in advance. You'd have to state for each and every category how much percentage I'm going to weight it, exactly how much that's going to apply to the final calculation, how I conduct the final calculation. Like there's really, in the abstract, there's nothing that makes being able to like drive around in a modern automobile better than riding a horse, right? In the abstract. Now, obviously you could say it's faster. It doesn't get tired as quickly. Like there's a whole list of things where a car would be, could be categorized as better at. But you would say, can I have a real personal relationship with a car? There's lots of things that you can, in literally everything on earth, there are ways to weight differently the categories such that any other culture could come out on top. And so I don't like saying things like cultures are better. That's where you get into, it's close to racism.
Well, yeah, they would call it
it's close to
a type of supremacy, cultural supremacy, supremacy.
Culturalism is now that
now, but
that having been said,
it's semantics. Could you say a culture is more advanced than another culture?
Yeah, I think you could say more. No, but again, you'd be weighting things in a certain way. But at least when you say it that way, I think people would understand the way that you're weighting in advance, right? So like they would say, okay, when you say you're advanced, they're probably probably everybody's mind immediately goes to technology, and cultural structures, institutions. So they would know exactly what you're stating is better, not that the culture itself is automatically better than another culture. But now, where I draw the line, where I take issue, is that people, like, for example, the Europeans may have come to Americas to like expand their culture.
There was
to
also
like thrust
economic
their culture
and religious pressure to get out of Europe. But yeah.
But the Apaches did go differently while they were here in advance, right? Like we act like there's any culture at all ever that was not one who would perform a conquest, and that is not the case. There is literally no group of people on Earth that has not fought conflict ever. So like whenever somebody says that a colonialism is bad because it's, conflict, because it's like trying to expand territory, everyone has done this. So it's like you can't say the colonialists are worse, right? Just like you can't say they're better, in my opinion. You can't say that they're worse because of their conquest.
Oh yeah, I mean,
retarded.
And that's the thing. I would say that Western culture is the most advanced and should be the chief culture that other cultures are seen through. You can retain your culture, your Italian or whatever national culture, but that you should see it first through a lens of Western culture and appreciate it first, right?
Well, one of the best things about Western culture is that within Western culture, you can house
Yeah.
literally almost every other culture, right? There's only a few that are so, like, for example, fascist, Nazism
Well,
would
that's more
be
of an
really, really
ideology. I'm thinking
difficult
like
to splice
Eskimos,
in.
maybe Eskimos like
Yeah, but even though, but many of the cultures are divided by ideology, right? Like, for example, like communist, you can say communistic culture is like a culture unto its own. You can say that there are various cultures that basically gained notoriety specifically because of their forms of government or because of their economic system that they introduced or something like that. But the Western culture can house any of those. But there are cultures in which, like, if we tried to put the Western culture in there, they'd be like, "Oh, no, 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 buddy! You're going to do it exactly this way, exactly how we want, exactly when." And I think that's an inflexibility that's
yeah.
probably worse than any
And
kind of conquest.
and there were
So
mistakes made done during the
that's just
colonial era. Like colonialism is not um without its fault or an unqualified good. They're definitely bad. But the play, I don't know if you've seen the musical or the play The King and I, sort of a classic example
yes,
of that. Etc. Etc.
etc.,
Etc.
etc.
Of this king, and he wants to advance, he wants to educate himself and become more Western because he realizes, even as a pro Thailand, Siam is greater, everything, he realizes um, the value and the advancement that Western culture has, and how much more ideally
Absolutely.
it has to bring people more prosperity and things like that. I would still
Yeah, I know
take
your
the
culture.
very spicy take, and I would bring it back to our call that Israel is a more advanced country and culture than what the Palestinians have right now, and their violence is not the way that Palestinians are going to ever improve their life. Violence will not, and if they want
Yeah,
the violence to end, they must surrender. And just like Lee surrendered to Grant, you're going to have to accept that things in the world aren't going to be the way you want, and that Israel is a legitimate country. They're not
yep,
going anywhere. Look,
right. Yep, and yeah, and they've got us to back. Even if they didn't, even if they weren't capable of it by themselves, they have the West to back them. So they're, yeah, you're not gonna
no,
you're not
no.
gonna bully
Next
them
time, well, maybe not
out of
next
the
time, but
world.
on Friday, we're going to have somebody who is definitely a little more pro-Palestinian than Eddie and I are. Eddie played devil's advocate
Definitely.
and argued with me, but he is generally more pro-Israel. So we have somebody coming on the program who's going to present this side, maybe a little more effective advocate for the pro-Palestinian side than either of us can be. So
Indeed, that's the plan anyway.
yeah,
Hopefully
but give
schedules
us your
align. But yes,
comments.
that's the
What things are we
so.
missing? What type of my mansplaining did you appreciate or not appreciate today? And what spicy takes should we discuss on Friday?
That's right. We'll see you then.